So now we're going to talk about attaching these three masses to the spine and then ultimately to our gesture and to our action lines in a bit. But right now I just want you to think about the spine. So the spine goes a bit like an S curve. And then at the top it comes up, dips in, and that's where we would connect to the cranium. So let's draw a circle for the mass of the head. Divide that up, just find a center. That'll give us our brow line. Drop that down, drop down from here. Give us a wedge-like shape, or it could be looked at like a square and then a wedge. Get that in there. And then for the torso, now remember, if you need to figure out perspective, you're going to go back to your basic primitive. Get kind of this back and forth going. So just notice there's, pinching to one side. Now typically for a side view, it's not as needed, right? There's not a whole lot of perspective going on here, but it does make you more aware of, the tilting. And that's a big one because a lot of times we draw bodies that are just too straight up and down and then not enough twists in the midsection. So this could even help with the twists in the midsection, because if we go back to the pelvis portion and say, well, we're going to put a little bit of dimension here, then immediately that's a little more interesting of a pose, and it makes more sense. People just don't stand straight up and down, right? There's a bit of tilt and twist in almost everything we do, but for the sake of what we're doing here, this is more just for a basic explanation to get you going. So I try not to overwhelm you, because there's, again, a lot to think about with all these different techniques. So we're going to start very basic like this and just get you warmed up. So just like that, we've got a starting point. And so now we will clean this up a little bit. And again, you really don't need to jump into the primitive forms like this if you don't want, because it's pretty easy to draw the oval here for the rib cage. Get that little bit of divide there. Opening for the shoulder. The floating underwear, however you would decide to do that. Remember, you can put a little bit more of a dip right here, and you can show the opening for the legs. So even something as simple as that. I think the neck's a bit far, so let me just bring up the torso. Now, a big part of this that I want you to pay attention to, or something that I'd like you to pay attention to, I should say, is that the divide and the separation from the three main masses. So as you start to experiment with more and more of your character designs and your figure drawings, I want you to really explore and pay attention to these distances here. Not only just as they sit in front of you now, but then also as they twist. So we're going to talk about pinching and extension, where when a body tilts and contorts, one side generally pinches, one side extends. So we're going to get into that as well. But that's where things like this really matter. Now, this could definitely be somebody that is more thin and has a very long frame, but there's just too much distance in between these areas. So yeah, I'm just going to nudge these around a little bit. I would also say that the upper torso could be a bit bigger anyway, so that'll help me bridge a little bit of that gap. I also feel like the head's a bit small. So I'll just draw kind of around it. Make that a bit larger. Make sure to get a little bit of curve here in the neck area of the spine, as well as right here, the lower lumbar. Get a nice little arc in there. And remember too, you get the center line in for chest there, and even a center line here if you want. You know, you can draw these guides wherever you want, whatever helps you feel out the form and feel a bit better about it. So let me do this. Let me tighten up on this a bit, clean this up. And I don't know that you really need to put the ear in there, but I like to have it in there as a bit of a placeholder. And just remember with the ears, they generally tilt back. They're ovals in the beginning, but they're not straight up and down. There's a bit of a slight tilt back to them. Remember that this is your brow line, not your eyes. Your eyes will go about here. And then remember the orientation or the guideline that you can use here. That roughly will give you the plane change in the position of the zygomatic bone right up here. But again, we'll get into those later. So we're gonna talk a lot about landmarks and the bones and things like that, mainly the landmarks. So we'll get into the skeletal structure, but the main thing that I think is important is really the landmarks that you see in figure drawing in the body, not just the knowing the skeleton. I mean, obviously the skeleton is very important to study, but you don't see the entire skeleton, you know, through figure drawing. Even somebody that's really lean, but you do see very distinct bony landmarks. You know, things that you can see in almost anybody are things like the clavicle and you know, so, depending on the person, I guess, you know, portions of the hips. But again, we'll get into that. So that what's nice about the landmarks is sort of like these guides that I'm showing you here, is they basically become these really great reference points, so that you, when you're drawing your characters, you get to check your work. Everything becomes a way to kind of keep checking your work and draw better and better characters from imagination. But the bony landmarks are probably the easiest once you really get the hang of them, know where they're at. So, because if you go off just muscle placement and then, you know, one thing being next to the other, you can skew quite a bit. But there's some other ways to kind of balance that out, so I'll be showing you that. Okay, so just like that, we have a primitive but organic three main masses to the body. And so what you want to think about here is when you analyze this in your work and you say, okay, is this, are these the right proportions? Are the divides in between these masses good enough for the pose I'm trying to execute? Does it have a feeling of a curvature and a flow, even from this basic static standing point? So hopefully you can see that by adding the curve of the neck, the curve of the lower lumbar, picturing the spine going through it, and maybe even drawing the spine through it. Maybe I can do that for the finished illustration that I'll share with you. So these things allow you to go, okay, now I'm not just drawing stacked blocks. I'm not just drawing characters that are overly stiff and upright. So it's that nice little transition that I'm trying to get you to take in this course, where you start to feel more and more comfortable with understanding the body a bit more, so that when you get to these figure drawings in the later portions and the lessons here, it's not so overwhelming for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop here. You can do this from different views, or maybe we should address this from a front view now. So we'll go ahead and do that. Actually, we'll head over to our next lesson. We'll do a front view representation of this. So with that, let's move forward.